and welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. This is Dr. Greer, and I'd like to thank the folks at the World Proven Network for hosting us here every 2 weeks to bring you up to date with what we're doing with the Disclosure Project and the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the film we're working on and completing Sirius. So thanks to all you folks there for hosting us. And I'm very excited about who I have with us today. Steve Alten, a very well-known writer and novelist who's known for his Meg series as well as Phobos and some other books. And his most recent one, I believe he will be able to discuss how he worked in some of the concepts of the Disclosure Project in the book, which is really quite interesting. He's a brilliant writer and has worked on many projects, and I'm honored to have him with us today. Thank you, Steve, for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Greer.
Yeah, why don't you let people know how it is that you found out about what we were doing and kind of how you worked it into your writing. I think it's really a great story.
Well, I have a series called the Domain series. It's sort of a Mayan doomsday series. I know we're beyond 2012 now, but I started the series back in 1997. And Domain deals with the Mayan calendar and the hero twins, but it really deals with the fact that extraterrestrials have visited our planet before, and the knowledge that they've spread through different cultures, whether it's the ancient Egyptians who built Giza, or the Inca, or the Mayan, or the Aztec, or other ancient cultures, and as an attempt to try to explain not only how these structures were built, but the purpose of them being built. And so Domain, and then Book 2, Resurrection, and then the final book, Phobos, Mayan Fear, delves into this extraterrestrial influence, and the hero of the story is the son of an archaeologist who was a expert on the Mayan calendar's doomsday prophecy, and the hero of the story is Michael Gabriel, who's when we first meet him, he's locked up in an insane asylum in Miami, trying to convince people that the world's going to end in the year 2012, which is a little difficult to do when you're diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenic. But what really enamored me to the Disclosure Project and your work is that in the process of researching Phobos, I came across the Disclosure Project and was just enamored with it. In fact, I sent away for the DVD, the books, watched everything that you had on it, and then realized that because in my writing I don't like to call it fiction. I call it fact mixed with fiction,
right,
for a more interesting subject. And I also realized that sometimes you can reach a different audience and a bigger audience, or my more diverse audience, through fiction than you can with getting out DVDs of the Disclosure Project. So I wanted to first and foremost, I wanted to become a part of what you were doing, because your altruism and your efforts are so important. And I felt that I could bring my audience to it, and perhaps even one day a movie deal, and we go from there. So I reached out to you, and you were so kind in giving me permission to use what I needed, which was transcripts from some of the speakers at the original Disclosure Project in Washington, and so in the section of Phobos that deals in the present day, I used excerpts from those speeches in between the chapters, and what it does for the novel's part is it brings a whole new light to whether extraterrestrials are real or not, and which,
right,
and which I think is really important for the reader, because if you've got somebody who's saying, well, I saw a flying saucer and they kidnapped my wife and subjected her to an anal probe, that's one thing. But if you have somebody from NASA or somebody from an Air Force pilot or an FAA officer, and he's giving testimony and you're using that testimony in between the chapters, and it sets your mind to believe that, maybe there's something to this.
Right. Well, absolutely. And this is, of course, many people don't know that Steven Spielberg's movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, was a docudrama, that he was actually given access to some of the files at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and that movie was actually more fact than fiction. And in fact, I know two people who were at the White House screening with President Reagan for Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Reagan at the end of the movie stood up and said, there are only a couple people in this room who know how true to life this movie actually is. And I've had that confirmed from two separate sources who were there. So this has actually worked its way into pop culture in a lot of ways like that, and over the years. And I really appreciate that you've put some of the disclosure project material in it, because what the disclosureproject.org has done, and most people don't even know this, is that there's a part that people can see that's been available, but then that's like the tip of this huge iceberg, and we're trying to figure out how to get the rest of it out, because we actually have right now over 500 of these sort of military and CIA and corporate whistleblowers who have information, and I've actually videotaped 110 of them. So if you look at what's even in the 600-page disclosure book, that's only like 69 people. So because no one's going to read a 4,000-page book, right? So and so it becomes this enormous archive. And so what we're trying to do now is that we've put someone on full time to go through this archive and begin to load up these interviews, at least what I call the director's cut, up onto YouTube, and so people will be able to see this over a period of time. And of course, the film Sirius will sort of encapsulate all of this whole subject, including some of the concepts that we're not alone now, but we've never been alone. That there's been evidence that there's been advanced civilizations that have been involved with humanity since the beginning of recorded history.
Well, I think what you're doing is so important, and I'll also think it, as we spoke before, it lends itself to TV too, and we're still trying to broach stations and producers to create some kind of TV series around what you're doing and actually use testimonies in the series.
That would be great. Yeah, anyone who for either. At some point, I'll tell you there are two things that need to be done. One would be a series that would really drill down for a few seasons on all the material that we've already discovered, but also to have a feature film that would be like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It would really be based on hidden truth, forbidden knowledge, which is a bit autobiographical. But that particular story turned into an actual movie would be an amazing way of telling the story to the world in a theatrical way, because of all the components of it, and that's just something of course, we've never had the resources to do, and the big folks in Hollywood who've tried to do it have been shot down when they tried. But that's another whole discussion of how media in Hollywood gets. You can do fiction, you can't do fact on this subject, and it gets killed. The studios kill it. So.
Well, one of the other things I felt that was fascinating that also played into the work that I've been doing is two things, really. The first is the energy factor that we need to get off of fossil fuels to advance as a society, that the extraterrestrials can provide us with that kind of information, and that it's being bottlenecked and really cut off by the powers that be. And
right.
As part of that equation is the military-industrial complex and their effects on society, and the whole ridiculousness of depriving the masses so that they can make a profit from these things, and also the timing of the extraterrestrials' involvement when it comes to testing of nuclear weapons. One of the factors in Phobos Mind Fear is that deals with the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva that's being used to smash atoms together at near light speed,
Right.
basically hoping to recreate the Big Bang in what's, I describe as an ego-driven search for the Higgs boson, or what they call the God particle, which is kind of an ironic name for a particle that creates miniature black holes as an offshoot of it, any one of which can escape into our universe and grow larger. And one thing that one of my characters says in the books is that there's two things you don't want to do with an atom. One is to split it, which causes nuclear explosions. The other is to collide them at near light speed, which creates black holes. And I just feel that the extraterrestrial presence is trying to ward us off of this Pandora's box, and of course we continue to ignore it.
Well, that's interesting because, Colonel Diedrich's and the people go to Disclosure Project, SeriousDisclosure.com. We have a site now where all these websites are integrated under one roof. We just launched it about a month ago. And it's SIRIUS, Disclosure.com. But there's a link there, and you can see that, people like Colonel Diedrichs and others who were involved in the early days, in the 50s and 60s, with nuclear weapons, that there was, in fact, he stated that there was not a single nuclear weapons facility or processing or storage area or site that had not had extraterrestrial vehicles that had been seen investigating what we were doing. And there was a man in British intelligence who told me that basically when the first atomic bomb went off, we sort of put a big red flag over the planet that said, look, these folks are in trouble because they've gotten to this level of understanding physics and the building blocks of the universe, but they haven't evolved spiritually or socially to where they won't turn them into weapons of mass destruction. And this is a existential threat, of course, to humanity. But I think, because I know what has been placed in classified programs that have to do with so-called scalar or longitudinal weapons, that they actually go at multiples of the speed of light, which is conventional physics is not possible, but of course it is possible. If UFOs are here, they're not getting here at some luminal velocity. If it's not crossing the speed of light, it takes too long. But that when you have those sort of technologies, but then you weaponize them, you've really got a problem. So, so much of it is based in the consciousness of sort of this primate tribal mindset of, my God is better than your God, and my economic theory is better than your economic theory, and my skin color is better than your skin color. We're going to blow each other to pieces. Well, when we just had maces and muskets and stuff, it was one thing to behave that way. But when we have these kinds of technologies, it's a real problem, and I think the ETs know that. And I've often told people, people get fascinated with this idea that somehow the ETs are a threat to us. I said, look, if you have any idea the physics involved in interstellar travel, if they were hostile, we would know it. And it had been the point set match at the Trinity site in 1945, where we detonated the first atomic bomb. The fact is, they're obviously not hostile, but they're very concerned, as witnessed by these military guys who've seen these ET craft at all these nuclear weapons facilities, about our hostility. So in our typical anthropocentric way, we always project onto others what we have within ourselves, but collectively. So that's why the movies that are coming out of Hollywood have all been all this rubbish like Battle Los Angeles and Independence Day and whatnot. But in reality, I think a movie needs to be made that shows the human condition for what it is. You put a big mirror up in the sky and say, look at what we are doing to the planet. Look at what we're doing to each other. But wouldn't any civilization that has been watching us for that millions or thousands of years go, oh, my God, this is getting to be a problem? Because not only are we weaponizing these technologies, which can be used for peace, we're also, withholding really beautiful electromagnetic systems that could keep us from destroying the biosphere and eliminating poverty and suffering on this planet. So this is a commentary that's not very attractive, unfortunately, on the human condition that we need to collectively correct. And this is going to be featured in this film. This crowdfunded film. By the way, this film is now the biggest documentary crowdfunded film in history. That will show all of these elements around the issue of UFOs and ETs and new energy systems. And I actually do have an announcement to make about that. I'd like to invite you, Steve Alten, and others to come to the premiere. It is going to be on Earth Day this year, April 22nd, in Los Angeles at LA Live. And you can go to SiriusDisclosure.com, that's SIRIUS, disclosure.com, and sign up for that. The theater, well, they say it's the biggest venue for premieres in LA, but it only holds 809 people. So we suspect it's going to be oversold. So we may do we're looking into doing a live streaming of the event also. We're going to have some really great celebrities there and other folks. So but if you'd like to come to the premiere, and Steve, if you'd like to come, you can come as my guest.
I'd be honored. And one of the things that I think is so intelligent about what you're doing is that, that with the financial crisis, they coined a phrase, too big to fail.
Yeah, right.
But with this, I think you have to become too big to be ignored.
Correct.
And you're doing it. You're doing it logically. You're doing it philanthropically. You're doing it in all the right ways. But just to get back to one of the things you just mentioned about the ETs and the effects on nuclear, the danger to ourselves and the red flag for our planet. I was mentioning that I have the series Domain and one of the books, Resurrection. I just wanted to read you a passage from it because it fits in perfectly to what you're saying, and that is that futurists had defined three categories of evolution for human civilization. Type 1 civilizations are those that master all forms of our home world's energy resources. That includes everything from mining the oceans to tapping the planet's core to modifying the weather. A Type 1 civilization is mature enough to rise above petty conflicts of politics, race, religion, and culture to develop a unified planetary economy. While still susceptible to certain environmental and cosmic catastrophes, Type 1 civilizations have begun the process leading to the colonization of nearby planets. Now, the next step up the evolutionary ladder are Type 2 civilizations, which harness energy solely by way of their suns. They have colonized other planets. They have begun the exploration and possible colonization of nearby solar systems. Able to manipulate their environment, they will no longer be in danger of facing extinction by glaciation or asteroid impact, but will still be vulnerable to nearby supernovas whose eruptions could irradiate nearby planets. Love remains the greatest strength of Type 1 and Type 2 civilizations. Type 3 civilizations are the pinnacle of advanced societies. They have exhausted the energy output of their suns and must reach out to other star systems throughout the galaxy. Their stars have approached the speed of light, perhaps even mastered Planck energy, which is the energy necessary to violate the very fabric of space and time. In other words, they can manipulate wormholes and things like that. Now, what we are as a species is a Type 0 civilization.
Right, exactly.
We're hopelessly divided. We're enamored in petty conflicts of equality, religion, and politics. Our technologies are focused on making war. We've nearly destroyed ourselves in the quest of ego and self. Type 0 civilizations are always prone to disasters, whether self-induced or as our predecessors have learned through the fury of Mother Nature. So the most dangerous place to be is where we are right now. We're a Type 0 civilization that has mastered enough technology to kill ourselves, but haven't gotten over the petty jealousies of not, instead of realizing that we really are one collective soul, that we still see differences in ourselves, and that's the most dangerous place to be. And I think that draws a bearing on the things that you do, because the extraterrestrials are only going to give us so much knowledge until we're mature enough to handle it. At the same time, they care about us enough not to see us to kill ourselves.
Right. I mean, they're very concerned about that, and I think there is. I mean, it sounds corny as sort of a prime directive that you intervene the minimum amount you can, hoping that the civilization learns from its errors and matures. The other thing is that it's not even a matter of the ETs providing us the technologies. I always tell people the laws of the universe are universal. So at a certain point, you reach this breakout exponential development of technology and science, which is what we've been experiencing for the last 100 years. But it's not within the setting of a rational free market. This is a myth. If we had a rational free market, the work of Maxwell and Nikola Tesla would have been out 100 years ago, and we would have been off of the Standard Oil and Rockefeller oil matrix back around 1908. Now, that's an important date for people to remember, because that was when it had been proven that you could get energy from sources and run your farm or run your house without burning anything. And there's a picture with this farmer Stubblefield and Tesla by their farm, and then another picture with them up at the Capitol, where they actually have this so-called earth battery running. And so one of the things that we want to do, and I want to put this in as sort of a punchline to this whole story, is to recover the last 100 years. You know, everyone's very enamored of the fact that we have iPhones and smartphones and computers, and yet they're all running off a fossil fuel power grid, or worse, a nuclear power plant like Fukushima, that when they go bad, they go badly very quickly. And so the issue becomes the suppression, because of the greed factor and the lust for power that certain cartels have always had on Earth, has caused an aberration in our natural development and evolution as a species, where 100 years ago we would have eliminated poverty and could become peaceful and not been fighting over resources and land and what have you, because we would have tapped into this Dirac Sea, as Dr. Dirac called it, or the Higgs field, as it's called today, or the field of infinite energy, as Tesla called it. And there were electromagnetic geniuses going back to the late 1800s who did this, but the folks who have discovered it keep going through the buzzsaw of these large special interests that have corrupted government in the military-industrial complex and have suppressed it. So this is one of the themes of disclosure is, and I know that this is going all the way back to when I briefed the first CIA director about this, or Clinton's first CIA director about it, and, you know, we're sitting there in the cover story with a dinner party, but in reality I was brought up to Washington to brief the sitting CIA director who, along with the President Clinton and his group, his staff, had inquired about this UFO issue and had been brushed off. And they were really pissed, frankly. I mean, they were upset, obviously, and but scared, more importantly. And I remember this Woolsey, the CIA director, going, well, why aren't they talking to us about this? I said, because they don't trust you with the information. They think that you're going to, once you realize this is real and what's behind the secrecy. He said, well, what's behind the secrecy? I said, we haven't needed oil or gas or coal or nuclear power or even surface transportation between our cities since the 1950s or before. And I said, that has been kept secret because they don't want to upset the multi-$100 trillion petrodollar system and oil and gas and coal system and electric grid. Because when you're talking about these kinds of technology, it's a whole new world. And unfortunately, you know, this is the thing that we, you know, I'm in Washington today, by the way, and I'm sitting at my place looking out over the White House, and I think this is the thing that policymakers and politicians never get around this issue. You know, they think it's just silliness, but really at the heart of it, the reason the CIA has worked so hard to put out so much silly information on this subject is because in reality it's really serious, pun intended. It's a very serious subject because it has to do with how we're living on the earth, and the fact is that there are brilliant scientists that I know. I know one of the top scientists here at the Naval Research Labs, where they have actually done this in their laboratory, faster than the speed of light communication, lifter systems that don't use any kind of conventional propulsion to have things float across their hangar, et cetera, and so on. Well, why then are we still filling up our cars with, Exxon fuel? And this is a very serious issue, and it has to do with not only our future, but how we're going to come together now as a people and say, it's enough of this nonsense. We need to understand the foundation of the secrecy. And the only way to, I hate to say this, overthrow it is it's a peaceful revolution where the people come together and say, we're not going to do this anymore. So, 100% of the proceeds of this film, Sirius, by the way, are going to go into a new energy laboratory fund so we can build up a laboratory where these scientists that I've identified over the last 20 years can safely work on these systems and bring them out fairly quickly to the public, because I don't think it's going to come out through Lockheed Martin or the National Security Agency. It's going to come out through an effort from the people, and that's kind of the average person needs to understand that this is something that they can do that will really make a difference.
Well, I hope, I don't know if you've worked at all or come across Jesse Ventura, but...
Oh, yes, in fact, his producer, Michael Braverman, and I are friends, yes.
Because, he has a voice and a political stance that would be conducive to the things that you've just mentioned, because I think unless we become with a multi-party system and get away from the two-party system, there's no room for new ideas like this. I wrote a book called The Shell Game, which is about the end of oil and the next 9/11 event, and which, not coincidentally, the Disclosure Project was, preceded September 11th. And a lot of it has to do with peak oil and the fact that oil reserves, world oil reserves, have peaked. They peaked in 2005, which means we're on the downward slope of a bell-shaped curve, and we are running out of oil. And unfortunately, our politics, our politicians' solutions to those things have been to invade Iraq and invade Afghanistan, and to try to manipulate the pieces on the chessboard for the final last world oil reserves, which are all, unfortunately in the Middle East. And it's energy has created not just policy in this country, but poverty and war and death, because we're still chasing fossil fuels.
Well, yes, and of course, many people even in the industry call it the black curse, that wherever there's a country that has large oil reserves, they almost always become fascistic dictators. Ships like Saudi Arabia and Nigeria, and very dysfunctional. And it's because of the way the system is run by folks who run roughshod over the mineral resources of various countries in order to make enormous profits on them. And I'll add another thing. The strategy of going into Iraq wasn't to get the oil, and there are very few people who know what I'm about to share with you. It was to tie it up. So oil would go from $35 a barrel to $150 a barrel, because they were about to lift sanctions on Saddam Hussein, who was no angel by any means. But if they had lifted those sanctions right before we invaded Iraq, they were considering doing that. Russia was, France, the Security Council. And if they hadn't hoaxed all these weapons that he allegedly had that he didn't have, where we could justify that invasion, oil would have gone back down to the Clinton era realm, where at some points it hit $12 and $18 a barrel. Instead, they went in there, made a mess of the situation, tied up the oil reserves, destroyed the infrastructure, which to this day isn't functioning properly, and therefore created this metered release of oil so that the price of oil can be staying up at around $100 a barrel instead of $20. So people have to understand that there are folks who have vast amount, and I was talking to an investment banker, and she was talking about, I've done $4 billion deals. I said, no. We're talking $600 trillion. Forget about your $4 billion deal. You're talking about folks who have such enormous wealth and power. This is how they're playing this on a chess game. And so that $1 trillion Iraq disaster was really about creating enough chaos in the world that second largest oil field on earth would get so dysfunctionally tied up in the war that prices would skyrocket. And of course, Carlyle Group and the Saudi oil, which they're pumping out of the ground at about $2 a barrel or less, what a great profit margin there. But Meanwhile, the atmosphere, and I think this is less about how much oil there is in the world, because I understand there's classified studies that show there's a lot more than people think and hard to reach places. The big issue is, look how much damage you do to get them. Look what's going on in Canada with the tar sands. And it's very dirty oil. And so the question becomes, when we have these other solutions, why are we putting trillions and trillions of dollars into those efforts? Or even why has our Department of Energy during the last couple of years put $100 billion into loan guarantees for the nuclear power industry, which is, of course, since the Fukushima disaster, it has shown everyone how very brittle and dangerous those systems are.
Well, it all comes down to money, unfortunately, and until we're still enamored by the whole dollar, we're not going to push ourselves into a type 1 civilization. We'll just continue to stay at zero.
Yeah, and the civilizations that are visiting us are beyond type 3. So, in other words, they're at a level where they've been moving around the cosmos faster than the speed of light, going through what are called transdimensional physics. And this is another whole area of discussion. But it has nothing to do with wormholes. It has to do with, you can take anything and create a high voltage signal around it, and that object will appear to disappear in front of you, and it will have blipped into another dimension, and then it can relocate on another point in linear space-time without going linearly. It goes non-linearly. So this is the kind of physics that there are folks on my team have worked on. And obviously, any of these sort of breakthroughs in science can be weaponized, and therefore the question becomes, how are we going to move on unless it's a chicken egg? We've got to bring out the first level of these energy generation systems so that we eliminate the poverty and the inequality and injustice in the world, which is the root of conflict. Then we have to figure out how to live together peacefully. So the really advanced, amazing technologies that have been discovered through the study of extraterrestrial vehicles and the ones that we have unfortunately shut down and gotten access to, those technologies are quite amazing, and I understand them. The problem becomes, you can't release those to a world that's been 100 years delayed in its social and spiritual evolution because of this other problem. So the aberration of greed and centralized control. So it's a massive undertaking, and most folks, I have to say, some of the policymakers and people I've met with in Washington who understand some of what's going on, they just say, well, this is too big of an issue. We can't even decide on the marginal tax rates, never mind something like this. And so I believe that actually it isn't going to be politicians, it isn't going to be corporations, it's going to be a group like ours that gets together and gets enough people behind it. And we do this in plain sight. I mean, one of the big mistakes that inventors and scientists have made is that they try to do this secretively. Well, if you do it secretively, you're playing to the power of the folks who have mastered secrecy. What you need to do is do it in a very disclosing way, very open way, and I think that's what we have to do, not only with all the information we have on the UFO issue and ETs, but also on these technologies. I think the development of them needs to not be a Silicon Valley secret project. It needs to be very open and very well known what we're doing with millions, if not billions of people as stakeholders seeing that. And this is what we want to do with this film series, is to bring that idea to people. And if it is successful enough, use that revenue to put the R&D, the research and development people together in a secure place, but basically virtually live stream what they're doing onto the internet so that, if someone wants to come and threaten us, gotcha on candid camera, and I tell people that, the only way I did the disclosure project was I get a death threat every week, and I'm not exaggerating, is that I basically do it in plain sight, and nothing I have is in one place. It's in multiple places. And so when you do something like this, you've got to understand that what they don't want to do is step onto the dance floor and have a billion-watt spotlight hit them. These sort of nefarious, secretive folks who are kind of like vampires that only come out at night. And I think that the way to deal with that isn't through some kind of conflict. It's through just speaking the truth and staying in that and doing it, however, very openly and fearlessly, because otherwise they're going to take you out. And I have seen so many brilliant inventors who've been shut down because they were one person doing it alone in their lab, secretively, and that is the most dangerous way to deal with this issue. You got to come together as a large number of people, which is what Disclosure Project did. I put dozens of these top secret guys together. No one really knew who they were until we popped it and brought it out. And I think that's what we have to do now with these science and technologies, and then get the public behind it.
Well, I agree. Like I said, I think you have to become too big to be shut down.
Right.
If you hang out in your lab, you're going to be shut down. But if you have to change the equation from, instead of covering up the information, to you have to make it to the point where if you don't get involved, then somebody else is going to get involved. Whether it's the Chinese or the Russians or the Japanese or India or some other nation's going to get involved. So you sort of have to accept, well, the cat's out of the bag now. Do you want to control the cat or not?
Right, and what they really tried to do, of course, a lot of conspiracy theorists didn't like the timing. We did the National Press Club event with all these witnesses, and 4 months later, 9/11 happened. But what's interesting is that it didn't change anything. In the last decade, there have been 14 countries that have opened up their archives on UFOs, from China and Great Britain to Denmark and Chile. And so what you find is that this is going apace. It's going to continue to happen. And in fact, the majority of people in the world believe that the UFOs are real and someone's hiding something about it. The studies consistently say somewhere between 50 and 70%, depending on the study and how the question is asked. So what we have to do, though, is connect the dots of what's behind the secrecy and what are they really hiding. Is it ET, or is it something else? Is it how ET got here? Is it, is it science? And what people have to understand is that, just these UFOs that we have great video and photos of, and that these pilots have tracked, they're not zipping around, skies going 40, 50,000 miles per hour and making right-hand turns without decelerating using a jet engine or a rocket. And one of the things that I always remind the public of is that our electric grid is from the late 1800s. Your car engine is from Mercedes from, 1888 or 1890 something. The jet engine was 1930s. And rockets was Werner von Braun in the 1940s for Adolf Hitler. So everything that's been developed in the way of energy and propulsion since the 40s is in a black box. And that's the problem.
Well, one of the, when I wrote the Shell Game, I also got some death threats and some other types of threats. And one of the things that what I've learned is that the CIA uses something called COINTELPRO that rather than try to fight the system or the information coming out, they try to taint it, so that if you want to ruin a gallon of white paint, stick a blob of red in there, and then it turns everything pink. And so, for instance, with the whole 9/11 issue was Bush involved, was Cheney involved, what was the truth behind 9/11? The 9/11 truthers were tainted by the CIA coming in and planning ridiculous stories along with the real stories, and that destroys an entire movement. And so you need to be careful about that, because that's already happened with extraterrestrials, with the anal probes and the.
Oh, sure. That's 90. You're right. It's about 90+% of all information on this subject is embedded information. I even know who it's coming from and how they're doing it. In fact, I've had meetings with folks at the CIA, and we talk about this. In fact, there's a PhD scientist, and so folks have no idea how much the information nexus on the UFO subject is mostly not the pure oil, but sort of this tainted information. And it's interesting. There's a guy who used to be the right hand to General Odom, who was head of the National Security Agency for years. And he says, yes, we have a term for that, DDT. So I said, what? You know, this is a chemical. He says, no. He says, DDT is that you set up, if someone's doing something, so you put something in there that becomes a distraction and a decoy, but it's filled with false information and it trashes the entire subject. And we call it DDT. And I said, yeah, well, you guys are very good at doing it. He says, oh, yes. And so, you know, and so most of what you see in the media, and it kind of comes out of Hollywood. And by the way, this is why, you know, we fiercely wanted to keep this film serious, independent. It's an indie film. And even our publicist, Jim Thompson, who used to represent a lot of big stars in Hollywood, he has a firm called NDPR, and he's going to be working with us on the PR angle because we feel like we have to be very careful because if we're not, these folks who have embedded assets all over the place in Hollywood and in the media are going to start sticking nonsense in. And this has been my biggest problem, Steve, I'll tell you that, is that so many people have taken the material we have from, whether it's Disclosure Project or other materials, and they'll take it, repackage it, and commingle it with nonsense. And that is something that, you know, I can't really stop except point out what the truth is. But I'm only one person, so it's a very daunting thing. And just like you mentioned with the 9/11 situation, you know, a study came out a few years ago about the anti-war period during the Vietnam War, and they found out that in New York, if there were, you know, like 12 people who were at a meeting, 8 of them were on the Intelligence Committee payroll, either for the FBI, the New York Police Department, the Red Squad, this thing, the other thing, and had infiltrated that group. And this is now a matter of public record. Well, the same is true on the UFO subject, and the same is true on other things, is that they basically put people in there who match up well, and they become a vector or an entry point for disinformation, false information, and it is a very, very big problem when you're dealing with something that they really do want to keep secret, is that it's kind of hidden in plain sight, but trashed with all this false information, as you very wisely point out.
Well, I think, you know, the suggestion is with the Sirius site, there needs to be a place there that sort of becomes, you know, check where people can send things in and check to see the validity of something. My mind's racing and I can't think of it, but there's a site on the website that when you hear rumors about different things, about different types of crimes, about people can type in the information and check it, and it validates it or draws it up to rumors. Right.
Well, of course, one of the problems is that we've always been a volunteer and unfunded operation, which means that any system like that that's put up, you know, people think that we have some vast, you know, office building filled with people working who could do what you're suggesting, but you don't have that unless you have any funding, which we have none. So basically, I mean, I funded it, and there are a few people who funded it, but we really have no resources for that. We hope that could change. The film, one of the things we hope the film will do is cause people to realize that this is a subject that needs to be pulled out of the sort of the orphan status and moved up to where it's supported properly, so that what you're suggesting could in fact be done and properly staffed, and that the energy project, you know, I had someone say to me once, you know, your budget is really very low to create a high energy physics laboratory. I said, yes, it is. It's only $6 to $10 million. I said, but that, if you don't have it, you say it's not a lot, but when you go to conventional funding sources or to the people who usually do this kind of research, they'll say, oh, yeah, you need at least that or more for a 2-year period to do a study. But if you don't have it, how are you going to do it? And so what we have to do is create the means where that can be done, and what you're suggesting can be done, where there's a clearinghouse where somebody submits a photo or a bit of information, it can be analyzed. And I think more importantly, we need a way to pull more of these whistleblowers out of the shadows and into the light. In other words, we get stuff every week from people who have worked in these areas but I don't have anyone to hand it off to. It's not like we have a team of investigative reporters who,
right.
say, hey, run this to ground and do a background check. And, this is what, my wife and I and a handful of volunteers have done over the last, 15 years. It isn't, people have it wrong. I mean, it's become a worldwide movement, but it doesn't have the resources that you would normally associate. I was just looking at the Sierra Club's budget, where, last year they pulled down $110 million. Well, what are they doing? What they need to do is take 10% of that and put that into a new energy lab that would fix the environmental problems they're looking at that we'd be off of oil and gas and coal. So there are all these organizations out there that pull in tens of millions to hundreds of millions of dollars every year, and yet this issue, because it has gotten so well ridiculed. I mean, I had an Air Force guy say to me once, Steve, he said, this subject has been kept in the category it's in, mainly because of the ridicule factor that was hooked up in the 1950s. And I actually then got a document from the CIA that talks about the psychological warfare value of the subject and engaging Disney Studios back in the 50s to make cartoons and to make light of the subject so that people wouldn't take it seriously, that it's considered kooky, et cetera, and so on. So this was done 60 years ago. Very, very careful. This is a 1953 document. This is 2013. So for 60 years, there's been a very well-crafted counterintelligence, disinformation nexus. But a lot of it is just putting absurd stuff out there that just turns rational thinking people off. And, I have to say they've done a very good job at doing something rather nasty. But then again, so did the Third Reich. And so you're dealing with people. People say, oh, well, these people are really all dumb. I said, no, they're not. They're just maniacal and, frankly, rather evil. But it doesn't mean that they're not good at what they do. They're quite good at what they do.
Well, again, and you're going about it the right way. You needed to get it to the public's attention and then have the public demand of the representatives to fund this kind of legislation, and bring it to the forefront of technology. With your series, with the documentary's debut, are you planning events that similar to the Disclosure Project back in 2001?
Well, they won't be like that, but they're going to be a series of premieres and, of course, interviews and press events that this publicist is coordinating with us. And, of course, a lot of this is just limited by budget. It was crowdfunded, and we don't have you usually get what's called a print and advertising budget that's many times what you put into the film, or as much as what you but we don't have that. So, again, it's all pretty much word of mouth, social media. One thing we're going to do, though, which is really quite exciting, is that we're looking at doing a video-on-demand system where it can become an affiliate, where everyone who wants to sign up as a distributor can and put it through their whole network, and then they get part of the revenue of the video-on-demand stream for their nonprofit or organization or something they want, or if they want to direct it to the Energy Lab. So we're really looking at this going very virally, but with some really big news media coverage of it because of the content, including the fact that we have one of the top universities in the world doing the analysis on this little creature that we have gained access to and are doing the genetic studies on, and also the CAT scans and the medical studies on, which I guess you've heard about.
Well, you've got 500 voices out there that have credentials behind them. Perhaps there's a way to harness them to contact the networks, the Today Show, get you on the Today Show, get you on Good Morning America the week of the premiere, get you on the Jon Stewart's Daily Show. Things that anything like that you can help us with would be great. Also, any people or contacts you have, because I could hook you up with our publicist who's going to be coordinating that in the next couple of months. Actually, this whole plan that you're asking about is I'm going to be in Los Angeles next week, where I'm going to be meeting with our whole team to discuss, how to stand that up with the resources we have. And so if you have any connections or ideas, we're all ears, really. Happy to help.
Yeah, it'd be fantastic. Well, the other part of it I think that's interesting about your books was this connection to the ancient societies and ancient pyramids in Egypt, because we know that there is unquestioning information from the sources I have that the planet has never been alone. In other words, there's never been a time when humans haven't had these sort of visits.
Well, what I do is I take a fact and weave it into the fiction, and I'm not making these claims with the Disclosure Project, but things like Rh negative blood. Rh negative blood is a factor that is only present in 15% of humans, and Rh is the factor that is short for rhesus monkey because it traces back to our links to primates. And yet 15% of our population has no has the Rh negative factor, which means that there is no tie-in to primates. And so where did our DNA come from back then? Was it infused in us by a higher source? Is it something that elevated us up the evolutionary ladder a little bit quicker?
Right.
And this is fodder for my series.
Well, actually, it's fodder for a lot. One of the guys at Jet Propulsion Labs told me that the reasons that the structures that have been discovered on Mars, which do exist, by the way, and even Buzz Aldrin has recently said we need to go back and look at these obelisks and things that are out there on Phobos and on the moon and on other things out by Mars, is that it would make a connection between structures in early civilizations on Earth and these structures on Mars. And I said, well, so what? He says, I said, those are millions of years old, aren't they? He says, yes, they are. He says, the problem is that it would collapse the orthodox fundamentalist belief systems of every religion on Earth. And I said, well, good. I mean, if people really think the Earth is 6,000 years old and we rode dinosaurs with saddles on them, too bad for them. He says, no. He says, you don't understand how powerful that interceptor is in this. So it was this astonishing conversation to be having with a senior scientist at Jet Propulsion Labs as to why this stuff, even this ancient information, is being covered up because of sort of the power dynamics of organized religion. And I thought, oh my God, this is so crazy. And he said, yeah, it is crazy, but
well, there was a great line in one of the Soprano episodes with Tony Soprano when someone was explaining that the Earth was only 6,000 years old and man played with the dinosaurs, and he said, what, like the Flintstones?
Right, exactly.
But people believe in this stuff, and, unfortunately.
Well, actually, yeah, there's a museum in Kentucky. They spent $27 million to build this museum that shows the children and dinosaurs playing together, and because the world literally has to be 6,000 or 8,000 years old. And in fact, there are two members of the House Science Committee, one of whom, I'm embarrassed to say, is a medical doctor who has gotten up and said, oh, yes, that's all true. The world is only 6,000 or 8,000 years old. And I'm going, wow, this is scary. That it's such untutored and ideas that beggar the imagination could become promulgated as fact. Boy, we're in trouble. Where science is kicked to the curb as hard as it has been on so many issues. But to hear this from a Jet Propulsion Labs guy about the cover-up of some of these ancient items, and there's a man I know who works under contract with the CIA. He actually works for a corporation, what they all do, who is routinely handed off devices during archaeological digs or from the bottom of the ocean that make their way or get confiscated by the intelligence community. And he says some of them are in the hundreds of thousands of years old, and they're technological. And what his job is to figure out what they might have done and how they might have been used. And apparently some of them belong to advanced civilizations that have been on Earth for which we have no record. Others are apparently of extraterrestrial origin. But this is a man who's a very senior scientist, has worked since the 70s for 40 years on these issues. And this sounds like science fiction to people, but it is not. And so the Earth holds many mysteries, and it's a shame that this has all been withheld from the public. But what we're hoping is that what we'll do with this serious film is to have it go viral globally and begin to change the dynamic. And it is changing, and it's inevitable that the truth on all this is going to come out. It's just how it comes out. Does it come out in a way that scares the hell out of people, or does it come out in a way that creates a positive future for for humanity, and we're choosing the latter. We want a positive future for humanity that doesn't fall into the trap of xenophobia and alien invasion week on the History Channel sort of nonsense. And I think what we have to do is figure out how to do this in the correct way so that people are inspired and it's interesting and it can be very entertaining as well, but that gives us a pathway forward out of the fear and nonsense that kind of dominates this issue.
Well, to be forewarned is to be forearmed, and you know that as soon as you pop above the radar, it's going to turn into War of the Worlds.
Yes, of course. We have no doubt. When we saw this meteor explode over Russia, I was going, oh boy, because immediately there were people who got on board. Hey, we have to have weapons in space. We have to, So, and Wernher von Braun had predicted that first would be the Cold War, then there'd be global terrorism, then there'd be threats from space from asteroids and meteors, and then they would pop the alien threat hoax, and that they would hoax an alien threat. And in fact, one of the men on my team had been on an interagency panel in 1974, now this is almost 40 years ago, where they were planning how to use man-made flying saucers. So we've had anti-gravity devices since the 50s, fully operational, and to do some things that would hoax what would look like an ET attack when it wasn't. And when he learned of this, he was so appalled. And another man who's a colonel who had been involved in the early days of the Star Wars SDI initiative had met with both Carter and Reagan trying to convince them to put, billions of dollars into these weapons in space. He said that was one of the cards they did play, was that there'd be a threat from outer space, or is one, and we need to have weapons that we can fight them with. And to which I just think it's the most ridiculous idea I've ever heard. Of course, even nuclear weapons, it was mutual assured destruction. If you're dealing with technologies that are faster than the speed of light, forget about it. It's going to be 0.1 nanosecond, and then the Earth would be a pink mist floating through space. But it's a fantasy that the military-industrial complex, we know, is going to try to foist onto, unfortunately, a gullible public. And we have to be there saying, let's not, it's like that old song, we won't be fooled again. I forget it was the Who.
And that's what I was getting at. And the name I was thinking was Snoops.com, that if you want to check to see if something is ridiculous or if it's real, people go to Snoops, and you have to almost create an equivalent of that on your website where not that you're there to verify every photo taken of an extraterrestrial, but you're there to verify the rumors that are coming out that are trying to stain the great work that you're trying to do. And if it's not certified by, your organization, then don't buy into it.
Right. Well, we would love to do that, and we do what we can with it at this stage with
I understand.
With me and my wife and a couple volunteers and one sort of secretarial assistant helping us, and that's how we're doing it. But someday I hope we can do what you're proposing. It's a great idea, and
well, I do appreciate you having me on as your guest, and I would love to be at your premiere and support you in any way I can, and certainly spread your information to my fan base too.
Yeah, we'll get the word out. The site, SeriousDisclosure.com, you can link it out to your fan base, and anyone who's in the LA area wants to come to the premiere, they can, we're going to do it so people can do it all online, so, they can already be pre-registered for that event. And it's going to be exciting, and I think we're going to have a lot of great folks at this event. We may even have some of these witnesses there as well, and some fun celebrity. We know that you were having, for example, this actor Thomas Jane is doing the voiceover for the film Sirius, and anyway, it's going to be an exciting event for everyone, and look forward to seeing you there. And I want to thank you for your, networking support and ideas also, Steve, and being here with us.
Thank you, and as soon as we end the interview, I will post all this onto Facebook, your site.
Oh, thank you so much. All right, well, I look forward to seeing you there, and thanks for being here. And I want to thank the folks at the World Fusion Network for hosting us here every 2 weeks, and we'll see you again in about 2 weeks from now. And until then, God bless, and keep looking up. Bye-bye.